We're finishing up week number 3. This is Friday, 14th. Network boot. This is the password when we boot the computers to the network side. Okay, this is Net 200, Introduction to Networking. Looked at some of the terms and basics from the first chapter. Chapter 2, we talked about iOS labs. We're configuring switch first time. So students need to be patient with themselves. It takes a little practice to work at the command line interface because you're typing in the commands at the prompt. Alright. Talked about the connections, and we talked about media. We're either wired, wireless, or fiber. We refer to that often. So we have a layer 2 switch, and that switch, we connect them, the switches together, and then we connected PCs. And in most cases, it's just one PC. We got 2 layer 2 switches. So layer 2, we talked about this a little bit earlier, there we're going to refer to the MAC address to make those decisions. We reviewed access to Work Server 2, and then from Work Server 2 you can access the devices. Let's take a look at that again over here. We have a firewall in our campus, okay? So the main part of the network, and then we have a DMZ off the firewall, and then we have the main part of the network here. So we have PCs in the classroom connected to the switch, and they're able to move through the switch, actually go through the firewall, and connect to one of the servers. Then that server can connect to this router, and from there connect to different equipment, up to 32 different pieces of equipment. So we can use this address externally to get into the work server. And then from the work server, we can use that address 172.21.2.250. And we can telnet to the device. And then from the device, we can connect to our equipment. Now, we also talked about, I'll mention this too, access point. Okay, similar idea as a switch. It allows devices to connect in. Here, using Wi-Fi. But it's still keeping track of different devices using the media access control MAC address. We talked about addressing a device. We talked about physical address, the MAC address, and then the logical address. Depends on where the device is. And that's going to change a little bit in the future. And here we would be talking about Internet Protocol. We get a different IP address depending on what networks you're connecting to, but your device always keeps the same MAC address. So, what we did here is we talked about internetworking operating system, the network operating system. So let's take a look at that. We can have, this can be some device, and what we're referring to initially is a switch. it has a motherboard, it has memory, RAM, it has a processor, it has non-volatile RAM. Non-volatile means will not go away. And then it also has flash. Flash is where the iOS is kept. So it works similar to a lot of devices. So the iOS, we have the BIOS. We can boot the system, and then when it boots, it loads the iOS, right, in the RAM. Then after it loads the iOS, it loads the configuration into the RAM. We call that the running config. Running configuration, and the startup configuration is stored in NVRAM. We have other ports on the device. Some of them have a USB, some don't, and they all have a console port in which we can use a rollover cable. All the pins, all 8 of them, all cross over when they come to the other end. Alright. A couple things here I didn't mention. We did a show on a copy. We did a clear. We reset the switches. We deleted the VLAN DAT. We erased the startup and we reloaded them. Alright. I talked about possible passwords on the equipment. Talked about using PuTTY for terminal services. Configured the device using the command line interface. How we access it. We configure it. We can copy it to NVRAM. Copy running config. And then we got going on the labs. Alright. This was the lab, so each student had a switch, and then they had a partner. We connected them, and then we connected the PCs, connected the device. If the switches were older, we had to use a crossover. In fact, let me do this. Just happens that the crossover cables are red in our room, but then pins 1, 2 crossover with 3 and 6. Send, receive, and so they just cross over. So the older switches, we had to use the crossover here. We'll talk more about that later. And then we use regular straight-through cables. Regular straight-through cables to connect the PCs. So we have these addressing for the PCs. We talked about that today, actually. And they rebooted the PCs to the network side, got everything cabled up, and some of them got it working, and others we would worked on it Monday. So that's it for today.